Okay, well, hello everybody. This is Lynn Serafin from TrentinoGenealogy.com, and today is Friday, the 8th of January, 2021, and no more 2020. That year has gone away, although some people said they want to give back their free sample of 2021 because they didn't like the first 7 days. But here we are. It's day 8, and we're going to have a lovely time together. And thank you for coming by. Again, this is called Philo Friday, and the reason why it's called Philo, for those of you who don't know, if you're new or if you just want a reminder, Philo is a practice in Trentino, a traditional practice of storytelling, usually between dinner time and bedtime. It was a way of transmitting oral history, a way of entertaining, a way of educating, a way of just being close, bringing the family together, a way of having fun. And also a way of staying warm. And I have to tell you, it's pretty cold here in Britain right now. I mean, at least for Britain, it's cold. So I have the heat up and I've got my cardigan on. But it was a way of staying warm because everybody would huddle together to listen to the stories. So when I tell this, even though our focus is on genealogy, I try my best to weave in tidbits of about families or people or culture or things like that, or something that's interesting. So it's not quite a story. I'm not quite being a storyteller here, but something that makes it more entertaining as well as educational, and also something that will bring us together and make us feel very warm. So welcome to the new year, and thank you very much for showing up. So tonight, I say tonight because it's 8 o'clock here in England. The topic, how did I write it? The topic is Trentino surnames and their roots. So what I'm going to be talking about mostly is about linguistic roots, which you've seen me mention in a lot of my posts when I do the surnames of the day. A lot of you know I'm writing a book on surnames. The book on surnames isn't just about linguistic roots, it's more genealogically focused. So the book that I'm writing has, yes, some of the linguistic roots, but it also shows where the names came, how far back they went, did they migrate to other places, were there, who were special people in the family, were any of them nobility or notaries or things like that. So that's not what I can possibly cover right now. So what this session is about the linguistic aspects of surnames. Now, I'm going to be breaking it into categories, and as I go through the categories, I'd like to see if you can predict which of your surnames are going to be following into some of those categories. Now, let's just talk about surnames in general. First of all, surnames didn't exist before around the 1400s, 1300s. It depends on the families. The wealthier families seem to catch on to the surnames a bit more quickly because that was like their label. But people in general on widespread use, by the 1400s, they were already quite in use. But before that, people would just be called like, Giovanni the blacksmith, or somebody like that, or Antonio from over on the hill, things like that. So surnames came in when they needed more designations, when the population got more complex, and when they needed more designations to be able to tell who was descended from whom. That's also a key thing, because I'm not going to go into that tonight, but knowing who you're descended from was very important for many, many reasons. Some of it had to do with church rules, but just in general, it was a good thing that people knew who their ancestry was. So surnames came into play for all of those reasons. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about I'm going to look at my notes. You have 4 main categories of surnames. So before we start, I want to start with a couple of terms. One is the term for name, which is nome. Looks like the word name, but with an O instead of an A. So nome means name, and nomi means names. So nome means names, name, and in Italian, the word for surname is co plus nome. But the way the language works is when you put co and nome together, a G gets stuck in the middle, and it becomes cognome, like the word lasagna, if you don't know Italian words. So cognome means with the name. So technically, a surname in Italian, the way it's thought of, is it's a cognome, meaning it's with the name. It's an extra thing that is given to the name. So you have your name, And then you have another name given with the name. So cognome was always seen as something additional. Now, nowadays we see it as kind of the cornerstone, but there it was something given on top. Now, speaking of on top, you've heard of the word sopranome. You've heard me mention that word. Now, sopra does mean above. And so sopra, if that means above, and nome means name, then you can figure out a sopranome means something above the name. Now, it means something above the name, above the cognome, and above there. We're not going to talk about sopranome tonight because that's a whole other subject. I did write a pretty long article about that. But I am going to mention something about sopranome, the connection between sopranome and the evolution of certain surnames. So bear that in mind. So nome, cognome, sopranome. Okay? So those are three key words that I would like you to kind of bear in mind as we're talking about it. Also, something I wanted to mention to you is that some surnames are so specific to a certain area. They really, really belong to a location, sometimes as small as like a little frazione or a tiny little homestead. And sometimes that surname is so associated with that area that you know exactly where the family comes from as soon as you see that surname. Other surnames, and I'm going to explain why, are not only common all over Trentino, and Serafini is one of them, frankly, but they are common all over Italy. You'll find certain surnames all over Italy, and it can be very confusing because they don't necessarily have that kind of provincial or localized identity that other surnames might. And again, I'm going to explain, some reasons why that might be the case. So bear that in mind. Some surnames are very local, and some surnames are not. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with a certain website, I love to go on, especially when people bring me surnames that I've never heard of before, especially if they say, this is an Italian name, is it from Trentino? And I actually don't know it. There's a site, perhaps some of you have either seen me share it or you've looked at it yourself. It's called Cognomix. So it's like the word cognome, but instead of cognome at the end, it's ix, like a mix, like mixing. Cognomix, and I'll share the link later in the group, cognomix.it, as in Italy. On that website, they have a map of cognome, a map of surnames in Italy. And so you can plug in a surname and it'll tell you who is in Italy today who has that surname and where those surnames are. Now, they don't have every single surname. There are some missing. Sometimes I have reported to them that some are missing, and they go, oh, we have thousands. We can't possibly keep up with all of them. But they do have an awful lot of surnames in there. And so sometimes if you're looking up a surname, especially if you have ancestors who are not necessarily from Trentino, but from someplace else, but you're not sure where in Italy they come from, this can tell you where that surname is most commonly found. And it shows it in quite a lot of detail. And it's a really, really good resource to have. So I'll post that link later, but it's cognomix.it. Don't go start looking things up while I'm talking because you won't get the rest of the session, but you'll have plenty of time to do that after we're done. Okay, so now, first things first. Challenges you're going to face with dealing with surnames. And if any of you have done research, you know that this is true. First of all, you might see a Latin version of a surname, not necessarily an Italian version. You might see early forms of the surname. You might see even sometimes dialect forms, but usually Latin or as opposed to Italian forms. And also, there is no such concept, and I want to stress this again and again and again. There's no such concept as standardized spelling until about the 20th century. No. So if you see a surname spelled 10 different ways, and often you might, it doesn't mean they're different surnames. And also me as a genealogist, I do not record every single spelling change in the tree. Some people do that. They record it absolutely as it's spelled. I don't. I choose one spelling and I stick with it. And my reason for doing that is this. If you keep changing your spelling every time you see it differently in the record, you might have 4 spellings for the same person, first of all, so that's confusing. But secondly, you might accidentally put in a duplicate person because you didn't see that they were over there. So it's always the best idea, at least for research purposes, you can always make notes about the variants in your research. In the tree, there's places for notes. It's always best to choose one spelling. And this isn't just for surnames. This is also for personal names. Like if you like to spell Margarita a certain way, spell it that way all the time. Except in the 20th century, when things are very much more fixed. People get very hung up about how they spell their names, but not in the past. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't even a concept. So that's one thing, at least in terms of keeping your data straight. Those are my recommendations to you. So those are the challenges. You're going to see the surnames appear in all different ways, all different spellings, sometimes even in Latin form. And even sometimes some priests will completely omit the surname. Yes, leave it out. And you'll say, what? Why? Because their description of the person is so specific that he felt like he didn't need to put the surname in. Okay, so 4 main categories of Italian surnames, but specifically in this case, Trentino surnames. 4 main categories. Now there are others, but there are 4 big ones, and I'm going to be talking about 4. Okay, so the first one is, and you've seen me use this term before, it's patronymic, or I'll say a surname based on the name of a parent, which could be a patronymic or a matronymic. Now, pater, it means father, mater means mother. So patronymic, this is Latin, right? So nym in this case means name. Patronymic means the name of the father. Matronymic means the name of the mother. There are some matronymic surnames. Not going to look at them right now because I found so few of them that it's easier to talk about the ones based on the father's names. A patronymic surname is a surname that is derived from the name of a patriarch. So in other words, the person who was the head of the family, the man who was the head of the family at the time of choosing the designation. And not only that, that name tends to be repeated every other generation, sometimes every generation in the family. And so that surname will then transform from the original name into a surname. One of the most obvious examples that I've seen in my own tree, I'm going to name a whole bunch of them, is way back in my tree, back in the 1500s or so. There's a Sebastiano, and their surname is Sebastiani. So Sebastiani means, in this case, I believe you could think of it as a plural of Sebastiano, but I believe it actually is more to do with the Latinizing of it, where it becomes what they call a genitive, meaning a possessive case of the name for Sebastiano. So Sebastiani, in this case, means the family of Sebastiano. Very simple. So it's very clear there. Sebastiano, Sebastiani. Sebastiano, Sebastiani. Very clear. Very obvious, very in your face. Not all patronymics are as obvious as that. The other thing I mentioned about Sebastiano is that sometimes they'll leave off the seb and it'll just be Bastiani or Bastiano like that. So, but most of the most common patronymics are actually quite less obvious. One of the most common endings, I'm going to mention a couple of really, really common endings, common roots. I told you I would talk about roots of surnames. Some of the most common roots, one of the most common is Gian, G-I-A-N, sometimes spelled Z or Z if you're in Britain here, A-N. So Zan, which is probably pronounced Jan, and John, which is, they're almost the same sound. And it depends on the accent or the regional area. Jan, Jan, Zan, like that. They're all the same. When you see Z-A-N or G-I-A-N or even G-E-N, as in the name, one of the names I'm going to mention, these all come from the name Giovanni, for John. So, and in fact, in Italian people, the nickname for Giovanni is Gianni. Like Johnny in English, we call someone John, we say Johnny. The same thing there, Gianni for Giovanni. So any surname, and how many of you there, as you're in the chat, how many of you there have a surname that has either G-A-N, G-I-A-N, or Z-A-N. Now I'm going to give you one other clue. If it's got a B after it, it'll be the N will change to an M, and that's got to do with linguistics. So you don't say Zamboni, you say Zamboni, and that's because the B is pronounced at the lips, and so you would have to change the N, which is pronounced with the tongue. You would change the N to an M, and this is a linguistics rule. Now, this is something that happens in all languages. If you put an N before a B, it's going to change to an M sound. So Zamboni, G-E-N, that's something else. That's something else. G-E-N is a hard sound. It's not Gian, it's gain, okay? Because a G-H, Susan, is pronounced like a hard G. Okay, so you have to know something about Italian pronunciation. In Italian pronunciation, a G is always a G, unless it's before an I or an E, but usually like an I. So in that case, if you're going to put an E before it or after it, you need to put a G after it, and then it becomes a hard G again, so gain like that. So it's a different name. It's not the same thing. You're welcome, Susan. So these kinds of things you have to know. You have to know something about linguistics and a little bit about Italian and a little bit about Latin. But really, if you just know a few basic rules, you don't need to know lots and lots of stuff. So names like, I'm going to give you a few. You tell me if you've got them in your tree. Zamboni, I just mentioned. And Zambotti is another. Zambanini. These kinds of names are all based on the name John. And in fact, I'm kind of thinking with the B in it, it may actually be based on Giambatta, Giovanni Battista. It's not just John, but Giovanni Battista. It might be, but I'm not quite sure about that. Names that are based on John, things like Zanoni, things like Giannetti, believe it or not. All of these are based on the personal surname Giovanni. So it means that at some point in the distant past, the patriarch of that family was named Giovanni, or possibly in the case of Zambotti, like that, Giovanni Battista. Zanotelli, yes, indeed. That would be based, that's the same thing. Z-A-N means Zan, and yes, Zambotti, exactly. So, Zanoli is another one I just thought of. So all of these are based upon not the surname, but the personal name John. Now, as you can imagine, Giovanni is a very popular name, so there are dozens and dozens and dozens of variants based upon this. So there are dozens of patronymics based on the name Giovanni. And the fact is, a name like, say, Zambotti, it actually is unusual that it would be so local. It starts in, trying to think where it starts now, Vermiglio, I think, and then goes down to Fiore, and then goes up to Val d'Anon. So, but it's in very specific places, and you don't see it outside those places. Maybe today, but that's because people move around today, but not in the past. So, but on the other hand, you know, they could, because it's such a popular name, Giovanni is such a popular name, it could be very common. And it could be found in other places. But let me go look at some other things. Some other roots. Another really popular patronymic root is P-E-D or P-E-T, usually with an R after it somewhere. So like Pater, the name Peter, in other words, or Pietro. That has so many, I think I've read, it is the most commonly used root in Trentino surnames, even more than the John one. So you've got names like Pedrotti, Pedri, Del Pero, all kinds of names out there with the root per, could also be Peroni, per, Petra, all of these. There's a name Petri. It's not the same as Preti, that's a different name. So how many of you have that? Yes, Pedri, there you go. So those are means that some patriarch in the past was named Pietro. Okay, so the head of the family. And it was probably a commonly recurring name for at least a certain period of time until they said, you know, this is getting too repetitive. We're going to find some other personal names, but we're keeping the surname. Lots of other roots. There, Eileen is saying she's got Pedri and Zamboni, exactly. So you've got Peter and John right there. So Pietro and Giovanni. So names like Albert, Alberto, which could also be Adalberto instead of Alberto. You've got Albertini, you've got Alberti, you've got A-N-T for Antonio. How many of you have got Antonioli, Antoniata, and Antoni everything? Also A-N-D for Andrea, Andrioli, Andreata. So many variants. I can go on and on and on. I would like Perignana, there you go, except that, no, you're probably right there. I was going to say that I think that's a place name, but I think it is based originally on a man's name. So as you're listening to this, shoot down some patronymic names. Albertini, there you go. I see you all mentioning them. So that means, this can tell you that at some point, there's a person with that name in your family. Now with Serafino, people say, oh, doesn't Serafini mean angels? And I go, yeah, but it means the family of a man named Serafino, which is a personal name. It's not that common, but it is a personal name. And if I trace my Serafini family back to around the time when these surnames started to take hold, sure enough, you see Serafino, and until the records run out. And so that was the patriarchal name. And so that's why I have the name I have. It's not because we were angels. It's because somebody called their son Serafino, and then he adopted the name Serafini. Okie dokie. So Lucian, I don't actually know that surname in Trentino. Cristofoletti from Cristoforo, exactly. Luciano is probably from Luca. Albacini might be something different. I'm not sure. Lorenzoni, certainly from Lorenzo. Certainly from Lorenzo. Absolutely. Absolutely. So everybody's now thinking of patronymic names. So you know that you've got a patriarch somewhere in the past, probably in the 1300s or so, who had that name. Now I'm going to go to category 2, and you can keep thinking of patronymics because this one is slightly different. This one is based on, remember I used the word sopranome. Now I'm not using this word now to mean the sopranome I usually use to mean the extra names that are given to a branch of a family to distinguish them from one another. That is a different meaning. Right now I actually mean nicknames to individual people. So a nickname given to a person, and that's, so in this case it would be a sopranome. And so that's how I'm meaning it in this case. And some surnames, some Italian surnames and Trentino surnames specifically, come from personal nicknames. Now, if you know any of these or recognize any of these, go ahead and shoot them in the comments, and because I'd be interested to see if you recognize any of them. If any of you have family in Saone, in Val Giudicari, there's a common and a very ancient surname there called Buffi, B-U-F-F-I. Now, Buffi means somebody who's very funny or comical. It's based on a sopranome. So somebody was, a really entertaining guy. Oh, who knows what his actual name was, Could have been Federico, who knows? I don't know. Federico, the funny guy. And so they decided to call him Buffi. And from that nickname, personal nickname, the whole family, because Buffo was the singular, that whole family became known as Buffi. Okay, so some humorous people in that family in the past. So another name which I've shared in the group before, which I think is kind of fun, is Malacarne. Now, if you know Latin words, mala means something not so good, means bad, and carne means meat. So bad meat, that's what it means. And the theory is that it was a nickname given to somebody who, maybe he was a butcher or vendor of some kind. Maybe he sold bad meat, or which is a bad nickname to get, or maybe it was some other kind of joke that we've lost in translation over time. And there are many of these names are you figure there must have been a joke at some point, and kind of a droll, dry sense of humor, and we don't know really what it is. Because why would somebody hold on to this nickname if it really meant that you're a really bad businessman? I don't know. But that's exactly what it means. Mala carne means bad meat. Same with the word malfatti. Malfatti. It's also a Trentino surname. It means badly done, or somebody who does bad things. So yes, malfatti, there you go. Tondo means round. Cheryl, so that it probably somebody who had a big round belly. And malfatti means something badly done. Again, I'm not sure why these names stuck. if they were negative, but they did. They did. Another name that some of you have heard, and I know we talked about it when we talked about Klotz, was Rizzi. Rizzi means somebody with curly hair. Rizzi. And because this is a physical characteristic, you'll see this name in other places as well, but there's another one you're going to see a bit more when I get to. But Rizzi means curly-haired. So somewhere in your past, a patriarch was really curly-haired, at least comparatively. It doesn't necessarily mean totally, like what we think, but comparatively curly-haired. And so that person was called Rizzi. The other name that is so common everywhere in Italy, every single part of Italy, another R one. Can you guess it? How do I spell Rizzi? R-I-Z-Z-I, Tara. R-I-Z-Z-I. Z-Z-I. The next one that is all over Italy is Rossi. Okay, Rossi. R-O-S-S-I. Now, we've talked about it in Revaux, but it is everywhere. If you go to that Patronymic site that I mentioned, you'll see Rossi is just everywhere. North to south, it's there. It's all over the United States. It's a very, very common name. Why? Why is Rossi such a common name? Well, Rossi is the singular form is Rosso, which if you know your wines, Vino Rosso, meaning red wine. Rosso means red. So Rossi, or Rosso, I'll stick to the singular, means somebody who, it would have been a nickname given to somebody who had a very reddish complexion, or reddish hair, okay, one of those two things. So if, or maybe both, but so Rossi would mean the family of the guy who has the really ruddy complexion. We use the word ruddy in English, so very ruddy complexion, or the very reddish looking hair. So because, again, that's a physical characteristic, it becomes a name that can be applied to everybody. I just thought of another one. The other end of it is negri, because that means black. So somebody who has very black hair or very dark skin would be a negro. Doesn't mean that he's a racially black person. It just means he's dark or very black hair. So so they would say negro, and then therefore negri would mean the family of the guy who had the really dark hair or a very dark complexion. And because these names are about personal descriptions, these kinds of names can show up in other places, but Rossi especially. Recla, yeah, had to do with ears. Big ears, exactly, Robin. It had to do with, it was a nickname given to somebody who had very big ears. I didn't write it down, so thank you for reminding me. So, and that's found in Ronsone, in the Sarnanico area, Recla, because orecchie is an ear, and Recla meant to do with somebody who had very prominent ears, and so Recla was the family of the guy who had the really funny-looking ears. So they kept that nickname. And again, I often imagine these things as given a bit in jest. Some other names. Merli means a blackbird, or plural means blackbirds, or the person who is the family of the guy who is like a blackbird. Now, what does that mean? It means somebody who's clever or sly, maybe a little sneaky. So, Merlot, huh? And so M-E-R-L-O, not like with the T, like the wine, but it means somebody who's sneaky or sly. So, you're a little Merlot. So you're the family of the Merlot. So that's based on a sopranome, on a nickname. My family are called, my grandmother's family are the Onorati. So onorato could be a personal name, or it's more likely that it meant just the honored people, the honorable people, or at least that's what the common idea of it is, that it's based on the sopranome, but they don't actually know. One of my favorites is Bevi L'acqua. How many of you have that one in your family? I've done this on a surname of the day before. Bevi means drink, or you drink. In Italian, if you say bevi, it means you drink, and l'acqua means the water. So bevi l'acqua means you drink the water. Now, again, this is supposed to be, the theory is that this may be a joke to somebody who didn't who maybe drank too much wine, and that he needs to drink a bit more water. So it's a bit of a slant on him. So it's like, yeah, guy, you drink a lot of wine, so you should be baby lakwa. You're the person who should baby lakwa. So baby lakwa means drink water. And in English, we actually have the name drink water. So I often wonder if they're related names in meaning. So that's a nickname name. I also mentioned spadapani once, and that's it means to save up bread. Spada, to save up, to hold, to collect, not to hold on to it. Spada, to be what's the word? Not to, don't dish it out too freely. A little stingy with it, perhaps. And pani means bread. So spadapani means just saves up the bread. And so again, a nickname. These are terrific names. Now, some of them, because they're jokey kind of names, they're much more localized. You're not going to find them so many places. But if they're based on somebody's looks, especially like I say, Rossi, something as common like that, that's the reason why you're going to find it in other parts of the country. But some of these names are very, very, very provincial, like Spadapani. It's going to be pretty much where it is found. Right, Mary Ostermick, you have Rekla in your family. Now you're going to look for old pictures. Well, I'm telling you, the big ears are going to be a long time ago, like 500-600 years ago, maybe 7. So don't worry. I think the genes have going to be mixed quite a lot since then. All right, so category 3. So far we've done patronymics, which are based on the father's name, sopranomes, which are based on personal nicknames, not family nicknames, but personal nicknames, maybe family, but personal nicknames. Category 3 is another nymic. So it's called toponymic. Now, topo, it's a Greek root meaning place. So nymic means names. So a toponymic surname is a surname based on the name of a place. All right? So that's no big ears here. Okay, great, good. Thank you. Good to know. No big ears. So toponymic are surnames based on the names of place. I'm going to have a few linguistic tips here that I'll give you no, I should give it to you now so that you understand where the places are might be different from how you see them written. First of all, in Italian, modern Italian, you don't have so much the consonant blends like bl, cl, or pl. Bl, cl, or pl. Oh, they don't say that so much in Italian. Instead of the L, instead of BL, CL, PL, you'll have BIA, g, or CIA, cha, or PIA, pia, like that. So instead of pla, you'll have pia. That's why the word plaza in English is piazza, which means the same thing. The plaza, the square, piazza, plaza, piazza. Okay, same thing, palazzo, piazzo, like that. No, they say palazzo, but that's because it's not a pla. Never mind, ignore that. But piazzo is a square. So when you see surnames with those kinds of y sounds, it may be substituted for an L originally. And also another word that I want to bring up is the word DAL, which you'll see in the beginning of a lot of place name surnames. This will become clear when I mention some of the surnames. DAL is a conjunct preposition or whatever it is for that means of the. Da means of or from, not of, but from. Da means from, and il is the, and when you put it together, it becomes dal. So dal means from the, masculine. And it's a dalla means from the, something feminine. And I just realized there's another surname I'm going to mention because I just remembered one that I didn't write down. Okay, so these are place name surnames. So here's a few of them. One of them, okay, first of all, there are place names that are just of specific locations, and they could be really obvious. Like, can you think of any? Dalla Piazza, Elaine mentioned. Dalla Piazza, so Elaine, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Dalla Piazza means from the piazza, from the square. Dalla Piazza. And Dalla Piazza has a lot of conjunctions. There's also dal Piaz, which is the same name, but seen in different places and different spellings. And dal Piaz is more of a kind of a localized dialect version of it because it's left off the endings and truncated it. But they're essentially the same name. They mean the same thing, but there are many different squares. So you can have variations on this same place name because how many piazzas are there? So you might see variants of it coming from many different places. Eileen mentioned another name. That's the one I was going to mention, Dalla Chiesa. Chiesa means church. So, and again, that word chiesa, originally there was an L in there in Latin, ecclesia, like that. But chiesa means church. Dalla Chiesa means from the church. So it doesn't mean they came from the church. It means that they lived near the church. Okay, so they lived in the area near the church. And Dalla Piazza means they lived in the area near the piazza. Dal Porto. Porto means a door, or no, a port, actually. Porta is door. Porto. Dal Porto means from the port. So they came from the area where the port is. Dalla Riva. Riva is not a river. Riva is like a stream. So Dalla Riva would mean somebody who lives near the stream. Paris. Okay, we'll get to that. Paris is something else. That's actually a patronymic, Robin, Paris. It's not from a place. I should have mentioned that. Paris is actually Latin for the current or the present day Italian personal name, Paride. So Paris was the original name, as we know it from Greek, from, say, Helen of Troy, that story there was the name of one of the characters, Paris. Paris is not the place, it's not a place name. If you have the surname Paris, it does not mean you guys are from France. It means you had a patriarch in the past whose name is Paride. All right, so I hope I cleared that one up. I'm glad you brought it up because I didn't think of that one. So such beautiful names. Aren't they lovely, Tara? Yes, they're very, and Dal Lago, Elaine mentioned Dal Lago. Lago is lake. So Dal Lago, from the lake. So it's Dal if it's a masculine noun, and Dalla if it's a feminine noun. Very simple like that. So these are generic kind of places. I'm going to mention a few more of those. Daldos. How many of you have had the name Daldos? Daldos, a dos is a hill, or like around the in Trento, you've got the different dosses, dossi, and so you've got Dos Trento, where the big it's a big park up on the top there. And so when you say Daldos, it means from the hill, from that peak in that area, not a mountain, but a large hill in the middle of an area that's not so hilly. And Dalsas means from the rock or the stones. So from the area where there are rocks. There are other words for that kind of same idea. So I've said Daldos, Dal Piazza, Piazza. Oh, Molinari. Molinari. That can mean two different things, and I'm going to get to this actually, no, I put it in the wrong place. I put this in the wrong place. Hold on to Molinari. I don't think it's a place name. It could be, but probably not. It's coming up in the next one. So there are sometimes names that actually are just borrowing the names of the places directly, like Caldonazzi means somebody from Caldonazzo. Chiusole means somebody from Chiusole. Clays means somebody from Clays. So those are pretty easy to figure out. But there are also surnames that come from place names that are outside the province. And I'm going to mention just a few of them because I have to go on to category 4 after this. Some of the names from outside the province, place names from outside the province, or toponymic surnames is what I should say, are names like Mantovani. Mantovani means somebody from Mantova, which if you are unfamiliar with that word, it's what most English-speaking people call Mantua in Lombardy. Mantua in Italian is Mantova. So Mantovani used to be a very famous composer who did 101 strings, Mantovani. Anyway, Mantovani means somebody from Mantova. So if they're in Trentino and their name is Mantovani, it means at some point in the past, your ancestors came from Mantova in Lombardia. So you've got that stretch outside the province. Bresciani or Bressani means from Brescia, which is also a province in Lombardia. not a city, but a province. Well, it's a city too, but it probably refers to the province. So Bressani or Bresciani means that at some point in time, your family came from Brescia in Lombardia. Tedesco is the Italian word for German. So if somebody has the surname Tedesco or Tedeschi, it means that they came from Germany originally, or were German speakers, is probably more likely. They may have been from Austria, possibly from the South Tyrol, but possibly from Austria, but were German speaking, and they called them Tedeschi, meaning the German people, because that's just the name they gave them. One other name I've mentioned before in the surname of the name is Alimonta, which is again from another Lombardian place, Limonta. One common name that many of you have mentioned is Visentiner or Visentin. Both of these names, both of these variants refer to somebody who came from Vicenza in Veneto, so the other direction. So originally, if you have a name Visentiner or Visentin, it means that sometime in the distant past, one of your ancestors came from Vicenza in Veneto. Which brings us to the next category, occupations. So some surnames are based on occupations. And don't ask me too much about German names. I'm seeing a lot of German names pop up now. I'd have to go look them up because I don't know them all. I'm going to mention one or two. But essentially, Marco, Taufer, I have to look it up. But if it is an ER, it usually is an occupational name, or it could sometimes be a place name. But if they're an ER, they're almost always German, almost always, but not in the case of Visentiner, but it could be Germans making it up. And they are frequently an occupational name, like the way we say baker in English. So now, let me go down. If you're using an Italian name, Tori or Dor, like D-O-R or T-O-R-I at the end, often refers to an occupational name. That's why I said Molinari before, because Molino is a mill, a windmill, where they would, make the bread and all of this, or grind the wheat, essentially. So a Molinari, it could mean somebody who lives near the mill, but usually it would mean somebody who owns and operates the mill. I actually put it on the wrong page. So Molinari is really an occupational, but in a way it's also a place name as well. So if you have Molinari, it means at some point in the past, somebody in your family either lived near a windmill or was an actual miller who lived at the mill, ran the mill, and that is more likely than just somebody who lived near the mill. Okay. Another really interesting Germanic surname that appears in Trentino is Keller. Now it's spelled, I'm seeing a lot of there. Keller is spelled with the K sometimes, like the way we normally would think of it in English, or a lot of times in Italian records it's going to be spelled C-H-E-L-L-E-R. Now that's not pronounced Cheller or Scheller. C-H in Italian is K, like K. So C-H-E-L-L-E-R in Italian is Keller. Keller, however they would say it with the accent. But Keller, and a Keller is somebody who took care of the cantina, the cold storage, especially for the wine. Somebody who ran the wine cellar. So Keller, cellar. So if you have the name Keller in your family, at some point, somebody in the past was the person who ran the cantina, who operated the cantina and took care of the wine. Maybe didn't make the wine, but took care of the cantina that held the wine and the cold storage for the food. And so that's an occupational surname that's stuck. If you've seen the name Ferrari, and that is all over Italy, anybody know what that means? Anybody know what that means? I'll get to that one in a minute. Anybody know what Ferrari means? Again, I've moved away from the German names for a minute. Ferrari, can you hear the word ferro in it? Ferrari comes from the word for iron. Ferrari. Ferro means iron, okay? And Ferrari used to be longer. It used to be Fabbro Ferrai, which Ferro, Fabri, or things like that. There are various variants on it in Latin, but it means a blacksmith. It means somebody who worked with iron. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of people who worked with iron all over the medieval world and certainly in Italy. So you see the name Ferrari all over the place, and it took various forms. And even the name Frieri, that is also based on the same root. So that's an occupational surname. What's the other one? Oh, Battitori. If you have ancestors from Saone, Battitori is a very common surname there. It's theorized that it has to do with, because again, Torre is an occupational ending, means somebody who did something. So Battitori, they think that it means somebody who used to thrash the wheat. That was his job. But that's a theory. I know I did Stadile, which I shared that in the group before. That's down from more the Rovereto area. And they think that it comes from German originally, and that it had to do with someone who lived in or near a barn or a granary, or probably had something again to do with grains. Name I mentioned when I talked about cloths was canestrini. Now, canestro in Italian is a basket. So canestrini is somebody who would make baskets, and they had lots of different kinds of baskets, or for all different purposes, not just some person sitting there weaving pretty baskets. Very, very, very important part of the industry, of life in general, having these various containers for various things. So canestrini was somebody who made the baskets. Now, ironically, the canestrini who came to Trentino were not basket makers. They were builders. But nonetheless, somebody in their distant past, because they came from Lombardia also, somebody in their distant past was a basket maker. Okay? Now, I see a lot of people, yes, iron, so Silvana mentioned that. Blacksmith, great. Some people have asked about some names that I have written about in my book, but I haven't finished yet. Louise asked about Paternoster. Paternoster is Latin for our father. It is not German. It is Latin. And some people have theorized that it could be just meaning to do with their father, but it's also the name of the prayer, of the Lord's Prayer. So I often think that it has something to do with that. I've seen various opinions on where it came from, linguistically, but we know what it means. We know that it's Latin. It's not a German name, even though it has an ER at the end. Larker, I believe, was, I have to look it up. I believe it had to do with the trees, like a larch tree, but it's a German name. And that does come from South Tyrol, I believe. Ziller, I can't remember. I'd have to look that up. Okay, so there's just so many names people are asking me, but that's the thing. There are 4 key categories. Yeah, sometimes you get names after plants and after animals. You will have surnames named after those things. But the primary ones, the ones that take up the bulk of all the surnames that you're going to encounter, like I would say, of these 4 categories, you probably got 95, 96 or more % of all surnames are going to fall in one of these categories, and the patronymics are going to be the largest. That's why I started with them. So you got patronymics, names based on the name of a father, the patriarch. Sopranomi, so nicknames, personal nicknames, not family nicknames, so names that stuck. Place names based on places where the family originated or lived near. It doesn't have to be a country, it could be just a place, a river, a hill, or whatever. And then the last one is occupational names, like the way we have in English, but baker and all these kinds of things. Same kind of concept. So those are the 4 key surnames. I hope that you found that useful. And the thing is that I also hope you can see how understanding something about the linguistic history of your surnames, how that kind of enriches you to understand where the families came from even before the records began, because all of these surnames started before the available records that we have now. So let me know what you think of that. Okay, next time, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but I will be here on the February the 5th, which is the first Friday in February, at the usual time. And until then, I'll see you in the group. I'll see you on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And I'll have this on YouTube when I get a chance to edit it down. So take care. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye-bye.